12 on a Thursday, and we are excited to be here. And especially Paul, who's going to be talking to you. So Paul, I'll let you get it going.
Well, thank you for that introduction. Yes, it is time for Chat with Green Aggies. I'm Paul Winsky. I am the commercial horticulture agent here in Harris County. We've also got Dr. Mung Mung Gu, who is our specialist up at College Station. We've got Laura Miller, who is the commercial horticulture agent up in Tarrant County. And last but not least, we've got Dr. Becky Bowling, who is our water specialist out at the Dallas Center. So today, I am going to talk about greenhouse sanitation, why we should be doing it, things that you should be aware of, and just to make sure that it's on your radar, and it is something that is really part of your IPM program. So, why do we want to do it? First of all, it makes sense. It is the first step in managing pests and pathogens. And in certain times of the year, it may get overlooked. We do get busy pulling plants, shipping plants, putting new crops down, especially growing down here. It's, the greenhouses are full 365 days a year, pretty much. Our growing seasons are much longer. So we're constantly putting product in. So we've got to make sure that we are cleaning these greenhouses, because it is, in the long run, it's going to pay off for us in better product, less disease, less spray applications, less inputs. The first thing we want to do, though, is and I know Kevin has often said this, is, start clean. The other thing is you need to get everybody thinking clean, and that should be the mindset. So there is a time and a attention to detail in order to make this happen. And then once you get it incorporated into your program, it'll be second nature. Everybody will be on board with it. When you have good sanitation practices, it will be evident as you tour greenhouses or you visit greenhouses or even nurseries. Those that have good sanitation practices in place, the floors are always clean. You don't see any weeds. You don't see any algae growth. And growers and workers often take a lot of pride in that when their greenhouses and their areas that they're responsible for are nice and clean. Ultimately, it's going to result in healthy plants. And if you've got healthy plants, the growers are going to be happy. And ultimately, your profits are going to be better, because you're going to have less scrap, you're going to have less shrink, and the overall quality is going to be much better. Some of the challenges that we're going to be that you deal with, or that you want to get under control by having this sanitation practice in place, is greenhouses are notoriously wet, so algae can always be an issue, especially in propagation areas. Depending on the type of floors you have, this algae could be a major issue. You can see on this bench here, wooden benches are culprits for a great breeding ground for growing algae. And so that's why we like to recommend, either wire benches or non-porous type benches, so we can get that under control much better. We know we're going to have to deal with insect pests. We're going to have to deal with pathogens. We're going to have to deal with weeds. And so if we can clean up that greenhouse as best as possible prior to these crops coming in, we're going to be much happier, and growing is going to be a little bit easier. One of the things down here in this lower picture on the left-hand side, you don't want that section in the greenhouse that's your pet plants that, maybe some of the workers have some plants there, or, these are something that you had in the house and now they made it to the greenhouse. Get them out of there. It could be a great breeding source for either insects or potentially disease. Have a hobby greenhouse or something separate, or, just put them back in the house. When we had our greenhouse here, before we flooded, the master gardeners would have a bench or two where all of that stuff would congregate, and they would complain they got mealy bugs, they've got everything else, and that was normally the source of it. So if you can get away from having that pet area for your plants, you can save yourself a lot of headaches. And the image on the lower right here is, greenhouse benching. Instead of just having that gravel, maybe put some, get those weeds under control, get them cleaned up, and put some weed barrier cloth down in order to keep those weed populations down. You don't need the insects that might be breeding down there. You don't need potential disease sources. So try to initially be aware of what the challenges are and find those areas where there may be issues and take care of them. So when we talk about cleaning structures, walkways, benches, and work tables, as I mentioned, you can see this bench here is a type of plastic bench. We've got debris on it after the crop has been pulled and shipped, and so that's a good thing. But all that debris, we want to get rid of that. We want to clean that bench up. So one of the first step is sweep that all off, bag it up, get it out of there, and then come in and power wash with soap and water, clean it up, and then we want to disinfect or sanitize it. So we want to do this to the walls, we want to do this to the walkways, we want to do this to the benches, and any of our work tables. We want to clean them on a regular basis in order to minimize the potential for disease or problems down the road. Just a few images. You can see here how this worker is applying the sanitizer, disinfectant. It foams up nicely so it adheres. You can see where you've covered. And then they'll come through and rinse that off. You want to start from the top down, so you can see this upper right-hand corner where they're working on the roof, the eaves, the trusses, everything is getting sprayed down. We want to get that debris. If there's any type of debris, we want to get it out of there, get it down, and then get it sanitized. And you can see here, lastly, your benches. So this wire mesh bench, much easier to work with, much easier to clean. It doesn't have the wood, difficult for algae to grow in. You can see the type of flooring is the concrete. You can see the drain in through here, so the water will drain, so it's not going to pool and cause you issues down the road. So really getting in there, cleaning it up, getting it as clean as possible prior to that next crop coming in. Crop debris is always an issue. You're going to go through, you're going to be pinching plants. You may have some plants that die. You may have some, potentially weeds. So there's always going to be some sort of, organic matter that's going to be around that you're going to have to get rid of. And these, of course, could be sites for insects to infest, for mice to infest. So in this image, it's nice. They've got a nice large, trash can in order to put that debris. The thing that it's missing here is a lid. You want to have that lid sealed because again, it could be a great breeding ground for some of the pests. I saw a talk recently from Dr. Cloyd up at K-State, and they went and they had these cans. They had two side by side in the greenhouse that they filled up. And one they left open, the other one they put the lid on it and they put a sticky card up top, and the number of fungus gnats and various other insects that they were trapping really gave you an idea of how this could be a breeding site for various pests. So by all means, seal it up during the day when the workers put it in there. And then at the end of the day, don't leave it there. Go ahead and empty it every day. Get into that practice. It's just a good management practice. Dump it, empty it out, bring it back, put the lid back on it, and you're ready for the next day. Now, if you do compost that material, at minimum, wherever you're composting it, it's at least 30 feet away from the greenhouse. In a couple papers I saw, they were saying about 100 yards. The further the better. And the last thing you want to do is have that compost area sort of upwind, or you don't want the greenhouse downwind of that compost area, because if you've got prevailing winds and you've got either spores there or pathogens or insects, and the wind is blowing and you've got your vents open, all of that is potential inoculum to come back into that greenhouse. So just be smart of, if you are composting this material, that you're putting it in an area that's, not near the vents and further away from the greenhouse, not upwind of it, just as far away from it as possible, and it's just going to perform much better. Here's an image that really, it's probably not the ideal, what not to do. All this material is wide open. It's not bagged. It's right by the greenhouse. You can see it's even spilling over. They've got more product, which isn't a good sign if they've got that much shrink and scrap that they're getting rid of. But just be cognizant of where these receptacles are in that greenhouse. If those vents open and the winds are coming down, or if there's greenhouses on the other side of it, you can see this fan here, and if there were other fans blowing that across, it would definitely, potential inoculum that could get into some of your other growing spaces. So just be aware of that. Recycled pots and trays. And I know in the perfect world, you're using new product every time. You're using new pots, you're using new trays. You don't have to recycle, but the way supply chain is, and talking with the growers down here, ordering pots and getting them in on time is a challenge. And so a lot of growers may be going to this practice now of having to wash and clean their pots in order to get their new crops in. And there are, certain pathogens, especially like within plug trays, that they have found the Phalaviopsis that can survive in those trays after the plugs have been removed and planted. So by all means, if you're going to clean them, make sure you do it correctly. If you do recycle, first thing is make sure all of that organic matter, any of that soil, any of that media, any of the root tissue is out of those pots. Some of these sanitizers that I'm going to talk about can be affected from that organic matter. They won't be as active. It'll tie up the active ingredient. Again, after you clean that out, wash them with soap and water, and then go ahead and sanitize them. So by all means, you get them as clean as possible. But if you are able to start with clean plastic, clean media, everything like that right from the start, it's going to be a much better step forward in order to get that crop up and running. Now I talked about sanitize or disinfectants. And this is a nice little table just to give you an overview of some of the groups with the active ingredients. So up top here, we've got ethanol, which is mostly used on tools. If you propagate, if you're collecting cuttings, 70% ethanol or even using isopropyl alcohol is going to work very well in dipping your knives or clippers in them. It is flammable, so again, don't have it by any open flames, things like that. For a large scale, you're probably not going to use it for, maybe wiping down some tabletops here and there, but that's about it. Tools and tabletops is going to be about it. The next one is basically the chlorine bleach, probably the one that's most used in the greenhouse for sanitizing. Again, it is volatile, so it breaks down over time. When you mix it, you want to use it probably within at least a 2-hour period, because then the active ingredient will break down and won't be as work as well. The next two compounds, Green Shield and Physan, and there's others out there, are quaternary ammonium is the active ingredient. Great for sanitizing. They do a really good job. Physan 20 can even be used as a pre-treatment for cuttings, and can be sprayed on certain plants as a protectant. So make sure you do read the labels on those prior to using them. And then we have the hydrogen dioxide products like Oxidate and Xerotol. Again, great sanitizers. You can see Oxidate can be used for organic greenhouses, and Xerotol is a really good broad spectrum type fungicide. I believe Xerotol can even be used injected into the irrigation system, so your nozzles will stay clean and you don't get that biofilm buildup. And then there are some chlorine dioxide products like Selectricide that can also be used. So alcohol, 70% isopropyl or the ethanol, it will kill the microbes on contact, so it acts on contact. As I mentioned earlier, it's not long-lived because it is volatile. So you want to use it, and if you're using it all day, maybe it's in the after lunch, you come in with a fresh mix and use that to treat your knives or clippers and things like that. Again, often used in propagation equipment, usually either by a dip or a wipe, works extremely well. If you're collecting cuttings from a bed, you can use that same clipper through that bed, but then once you go to another bed, I would definitely dip and clean or get a fresh pair. So just make sure this is all part of that training for your employees to make sure they're aware of, why they're doing it, so they don't spread the disease, and it's just going to result in a better quality cutting in the long run. As I mentioned, bleach, the sodium hypochlorite, most widely used. It's least expensive. I don't think I've ever been in a greenhouse where you don't see several cases of bleach somewhere in the corner. As I mentioned, used within 2 hours of mixing, since the chlorine is volatile. The common mixture is 1 part of bleach to 9 parts water for killing microbes. And this is one where you want to make sure, especially with your pots, that you are getting that organic matter out, because that organic matter can tie up and neutralize the chlorine in the solution, and it's not going to work as well. So, take that few extra steps to get the organic matter out, wash it out, and then you can go ahead and do your sanitization. The hydrogen dioxide, so this is an oxidizing agent and it kills a wide range of microbes, again, on contact, and works very well in sanitizing the benches, pots, any type of the structures. And down below, you can see some of the brand names. Xerotol, Oxidate, and Sanidate are out there. And then last but not least, those quaternary ammonium chloride salts. Now, these do not lose their potency as it's being used. So, like bleach or the ethanol will not be as active over time. This one will stay, as strong, stay as potent when you mix it. And if you use it throughout the entire day, that concentration is going to hold up. But this active ingredient is another one, just like the bleach, that you want to make sure that organic matter. So if you're treating your benches, if you remember back from that previous slide of the some of that media, growing media on the bench, you want to make sure you get that all cleaned up and off of there, because you don't want to treat with this sanitizer, because that organic matter will tie up that active ingredient and will not work as well. Some of the products in this group: Physan 20, Green Shield, and Clean Grow. And then, as I said, Physan 20 can be used as a seed treatment to clean them up. It can be mixed into the water for cut flowers to cut down on microbe proliferation, and it can also be used to treat plants for certain things. Again, with all of these items, make sure you're reading those labels, following directions, using the proper PPE when you're applying or treating with it. Your tools and equipment, we can easily spread those pathogens with our cutting tools. So we want to make sure we sanitize between the blocks of plants or from plant to plant, depending if it's a stock plant. And then again, using either ethyl or isopropyl alcohol is probably your best bet. I have seen some growers use Lysol wipes, things like that, and that works fine also. But as long as you're doing using something and not potentially spreading pathogens from plant to plant or from block to block by not using any type of treatment.
I know
Irrigation.
we all
I'm
got
sorry.
a lot of like really bad smelling hand sanitizer, so this is a great use for that.
There,
That extra hand sanitizer.
Yeah, if it works and it's readily available, it probably will knock those pathogens down and keep them clean. On the irrigation side, this image down here in the middle, this is what we don't want. You don't want to see that uh, irrigation wand, that breaker nozzle laying on the ground. You can see the algae that's growing there. So it's a very wet area, probably a spot where putting down some of that weed barrier cloth is going to help deter that and make it look a lot cleaner. What we want to see is this image on the left-hand side here, where the hose is up off the ground, it's overhead. You can see that nozzle is up and out of the way. So when you water, we're not spreading any pathogens. And I've been in greenhouses where they have some disinfectant and they dip prior to watering the benches. And, I've seen all extremes. I have seen, this lower picture in a greenhouse, and I have seen, this in other greenhouses. So again, that ounce of prevention here is probably much better practice than what we're seeing down here. Your irrigation systems, especially in propagation where you're running that water on a regular basis, make sure you're cleaning those nozzles and those emitters, removing that dirt. This cutaway inside this piece of PVC, this is that biofilm that we see that starts to accumulate. And so there are products like that Physan or Zerotol that I think you can run through these to clear that up. If you're, purging that system with an active ingredient, make sure you have all those nozzles out so they don't get clogged. And you can flush all of that out of the system. So by all means, from starting from the top of the greenhouse to the benches to the walls, under the benches, any place that we can clean up and get things nice and clean and improve the start for that crop is going to pay off in the long run. When you get new plants in, we want to make sure that, especially with plugs and liners, have an area where you can quarantine this product as it comes in, where you can give it a day or two just to look at it. Make sure you look at it as it comes in, that it passes your quality, passes your standards. Give it a day or two, depending on the schedule. Get your pesticide people in there looking at it. I know a lot of growers or a lot of plug producers are starting to produce the information where you can find out what's been sprayed on those liners. So this gives you a good idea also of what you're dealing with, especially if you focus on releasing beneficial insects. You don't want something that's liners or plugs that have been treated with something that has a long residual, which will, really give you issues with establishing those beneficials in that crop. So by all means, keep them separate up until they go to canning or up to potting, and make sure you're inspecting them and looking for any issues, any problems that may occur. So in summary, the sanitation, it's going to save you money. In most cases, you're going to reduce the amount of chemical control that you're going to have to use. So maybe if a crop in the past was maybe 3 or 4 applications of whether it's combinations of a fungicide or an insecticide, maybe you're down to 2, 1 and 1, because you've got that house nice and clean. You've monitored the liners before they went in, they're clean. And the other thing that I think a lot of growers don't think about or aren't aware of is, if you don't have to spray as often with these active ingredients, you actually improve the effectiveness because you're not using them as often. So there's less chance of resistance buildup, either with the pest or with the pathogen. So, keep that in the back of your mind. Fewer inputs, that's more money in your pocket when that crop goes out, because it's costing you less to produce. The other thing, by maintaining clean structures and the hard goods, the benches and stuff like that, is they're going to last you longer. It's a big investment when you have these greenhouses and benches and irrigation systems and all. So, again, that ounce of prevention, that maintenance, running them clean is going to be a definitely a positive step in order to keep that working properly and lasting longer. Results in a safer environment, especially with algae. You definitely don't want people slipping and falling on that. So, keeping that clean area is going to be a positive. Ultimately, we want to reduce our crop losses. We want to lower our pesticide costs, and we want to have higher quality plants. And so I think if you start thinking clean, these are going to be the results of it. And ultimately, seeing those plants on the racks, going on the truck, out to the customer is the ultimate goal. So with that, are there any questions?
Oh, you've got a question in the chat, which is, will airing out your irrigation hoses clean out the biofilm?
I don't think it will clean it out. It will dry it up. But in most cases, what will happen then is, once the moisture starts to build up, that those pathogens or will start to grow again. So by all means, if you can flush it and treat it with something, it's going to help, and it's going to be you're going to see much better results.
Okay, I think Mung is Dr. Ong was not able to be with us today, so he recorded his presentation, and Mung's gonna start playing that.
Yeah, can you guys hear this?
No, his mouth is moving. I think you're gonna have to share the sound.
Oh, okay.
There's a setting. But we can pretend we know what he's saying, right? He's saying, "Hi, I'm Kevin Ong."
Let me try this. Can you hear it? Laura, can you hear it?
No, I'm not hearing anything. But it's not playing at this moment.
Yeah, it wasn't playing, Mung.
It's I'm not hearing still. Mouth moving, no sound.
Still can't hear.
No.
Still cannot hear it.
Mm-mm.
Okay, all right. I apologize. This may just take a, hold on, just take a second. I apologize. I thought that this will be, displayed directly from the Google Drive.
Oh, it's in the Google Drive.
Yes,
I
it's in the, yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's kind of hard for your internet to do that.
Okay,
Like,
maybe that's the case.
Yeah.
It just in less than 10 seconds we'll be able to play this just from my computer.
Okay.
Yeah, I appreciate everyone's patience with me. I'm hoping to delay this a little bit so Dr. Ong can join us, at the after his national meeting.
Oh, really?
Yeah, this is a strategic delaying of the process. oh. How do I,
In the chat box, Mr. Pena said, make sure you go to audio and share the sound.
go to
Yeah,
the
you'd have
audio?
to, yeah, you'd have to go into your settings and say, it's kind of like, I think it may say share sound from video or something like that.
That's very good. Thank you.
Yeah.
Let's do this again. Can you guys hear it?
No, we're not hearing anything, but it's also not going right now.
Oh, I see. Okay. All right. I think I need to stop share, but then share it. Hold on. I know how to do this. I can do this. Where's the video?
You know, it's been a long couple of years. We're still working on this whole
Where's my
virtual world.
I can. Okay. All right.
Today, so this is
Can you hear it?
Yay! Yeah.
So you can hear it, and
Yes.
and you can see it full screen, right?
Yes, it's great.
All right. Let's go.
good afternoon, folks. Sorry I can't be with you today. So this is coming to you in the form of a recorded session where I'll be talking about disease prevention in the fall. Well, this is November, so it is kind of a little bit late to talk about disease prevention, but I think we can look at a few of the topical areas and explore those in terms of coming from a landscape maintenance operator side and what you can or cannot do, should or should not do, and some of the practices to keep in mind as you go about, whether it's advising folks or putting the practice in yourself, in your business, helping these clients. All right, when we talk about landscape ornamental disease prevention, whether it's fall or the spring or the summer, let's look at it in a couple of ways. One is things that you can advise your clients. The other things is things that you can do as a landscape maintenance operator or somebody that's taking care of a sports field or landscape type situation. So if you look at this slide, what I have here is just a listing of a few things that we will actually explore. Cultural practices, sanitation, proper fertilization, proper preventative treatment, proper conditioning of plants, encouraging planning ahead. Those are things that I feel like you can do to advise your clients. In terms of what could you put together as a service for your clients or things that you can practice if you're managing one of those landscapes, again, consider those cultural practices. This could be automated or take a full service type approach where you look at the amount of time that you may have to have people on the property to do some of those evaluation and treatment as needed. Chemical treatments. Now, this is when I say chemical treatments, it could be fertility, it could be for pest management, regardless of which it is. Those are things that need to be considered because you have to think about timing, type of material that you're using, so on and so forth. Now, you also, one of the value-added things that you can provide for your clients is what we call a care plan. Very much like a medical type situation, a care plan is sitting down with the homeowner and going through what they want out of their landscape and then figuring out, taking into account a lot of different things that would impact that particular landscape, and realize each landscape is unique. Each landscape is different. You would have to consider several things, and we'll explore some of those things in the next few slides. So I just went to our plant disease diagnostic lab database and just pull out some data and said, okay, let's look at stuff that we would find on the landscape since September 1 to date, and what kind of diagnosis, what kind of samples are we seeing? So the samples are lumped together. Turf grass, trees, mostly shade trees, woody ornamentals, herbaceous ornamentals. And on this graph, what I wanted to point out is where you see that orange band, that's fungi. So majority of the diagnosis we've been getting back is fungi. Now, several of those you will notice that there are few in terms of what we call oomycetes. So oomycetes would be like the phytophoras, the pythiums, fungus, things like if it's on turf, that would be your take all Pashcomonomyces graminis or Rhizoctonia, your large patch or brown patch. And then you'll see a few different types of fungi on trees, on other woody ornamentals as well as herbaceous ornamentals. So Rhizoctonia would fall in that. Then you also, what this didn't parse out were those things that were affecting the leaves, foliar type pathogens, so foliar type diseases. So we see some of the anthracnose, the Calototricum, the gliosporiums, some of the powder mildews, falling in this category. The point being is in just looking at a data of samples that come into the clinic, and hopefully, we don't catch a lot of the common things. You do get a majority of the plant disease that folks are going to see out there is going to be caused by fungal agents. Now, one of the things about prevention of diseases, whether it's the fall or any other time for that matter, is that there are many things that you can do that are non-chemical in nature. Cultural practices are things that you can put into practice, whether this is irrigation practices, cultivation practices, and the goal is this. You're using those cultural practices to create an environment which is not conducive to the disease pathogen. Think about how do you reduce potential overwintering risk. So in other words, if you do have disease, what can you do to prevent the disease from getting bad next spring, or even thinking before then to say, what should I do in the summer so I don't get into this situation? It's two different things. So let's first take a look at summer going into fall. So if you know fall is happening, the leaves are starting to senesce. So in other words, some could be turning yellow. And when they do senesce, they become a little bit susceptible to some pathogens. So more of the opportunistic microbes will come in, will colonize that leaves that's dying to gain some nutrients from it. So you probably see things, anthracnose, black spot on roses get worse at this time because that leaf is a little bit more susceptible. And you might consider here is, well, what do you do next? If, for example, like black spot on roses, it infects the leaves and the leaves drop. Well, it's not a bad idea to let's say rake up the leaves and get rid of it. The reason being that those that fungi on that leaf, those lesions, they could be overwintering structures. In other words, that fungus could live on that dead leaf that's in that mulch layer of leaves at the base of the plant. And then come spring again, you have a ready source of spores that could be produced from that fungi that actually survive on that leaf material. So a cultural practice there would be something as simple as sanitation, cleaning up the garden and essentially getting rid of potential new sources of infection propagules. Now, keep in mind, as you do this through the even the winter months or even the summer months, it's a good common sense practice, because what it does is it reduces, especially on disease which we call polycyclic disease, that has the ability to produce more of itself and cause damage or new infections within that same growing season, by removing potential where the pathogen might be on structures, on old lesions or something. What you're doing is actually removing potential infectious propagules. So you're reducing risk. So the whole concept of cultural practices is to do things to reduce risk of disease onset or disease development. Another good example is proper irrigation. Now, what we find is going to the fall, most plants are starting to wind down, go dormant, assuming they're not over evergreens. Um, well, even the evergreens will start slowing down a little bit in terms of the metabolism and transpiration and all that sort of things. Um, at the same time, too, most parts of Texas will start getting more rain. So if you are on an irrigation or sprinkler type timer, that has to change. You probably don't need to run it as long. The water needs is probably going to be reduced, and so you want to act appropriately. If there's a lot of rain, well, then perhaps have the sprinkler turn off. Or if there's none, reduce it somewhat because you realize the plant is not going to pick up as much water. Here is how the risk is reduced. Oomycetes, the Phytophthora, the Pythiums, the different fungal agents, they love water. And so if the soil is moist, the soil is extremely wet, it does two things. One, it's going to stress the plant out, making the plant more susceptible. And secondly, it creates an environment where the fungi or the oomycete, the water mold, can thrive. And if it thrives and becomes more aggressive, now you have a pathogen that is more likely to go attack the plant, and you have a plant that is more susceptible to it. So you end up getting root rots, and that's what we see in the plant clinic very often. When in the fall we'll have a rash of and this is going to be usually herbaceous ornamentals or woody ornamentals, where we get positive detection for Phytophthora type root rots, occasionally Fusarium root rots. So that's the impact of water. And also realize one thing, the amount of moisture in that microenvironment around the plant can also impact foliar type diseases. For example, powdery mildew on roses, on crepe myrtle. If you have the sprinkler going in the evening and it's somewhat warm and you get that high humidity, well, that's gonna be good environment for powdery mildew to take off, to cause an infection and to take off. So by reducing the amount of relative humidity in the canopy area, you reduce the risk for those types of infection. Now let's talk about chemical treatments. There are two ways to look at this. Is it preventative or is it curative? Which one to use and how to do it? Now, earlier I told you, I said we have two ways of looking at this. One is we can help advise the homeowner with actions that the homeowner can do, or if you as a landscape maintenance operator or a landscape manager, things that you can do. Now keep in mind, a homeowner is less likely to have access to some types of pesticides. And if you are in the business, if you're in industry, very likely that you would have a pesticide applicators, which would applicator license that would give you access to some of those restrict type fungicides and pesticides. So preventative versus curative. Uh, Two things to look at it this way. Preventative, things that you want to put down, you ought to put down before something bad happens. And curative is if when something bad happens, you utilize it to knock the disease back. Now, there is benefits to both of this. In terms of a low impact approach, very often we tell folks, you know what, monitor the plant if there is a certain disease that comes in. Now, obviously, with the assumption here that you can identify or at least get close to and identifying the problem. And once you see that problem, and assuming that you can identify it, and hopefully it's one of those common ones, there are products out there that you can utilize, mostly systemic type chemicals, that will have curative properties. So in other words, when the disease is not bad, you start using it, it would knock it back and it would suppress that pathogen population. And so allow the plant at least to thrive a little bit. So what you're doing there is knocking back the population of the pathogen. Now, preventative takes the other approach. This is the best way to use preventative is thinking about making some predictions. If you know that a particular disease issue is going to happen, or would happen or would likely to happen in that landscape. Whether it's because of the environmental condition or because that it had happened the year before and the year before after that. And so what you want to do is have a programmed treatment. So realize, hey, if the temperature is going down from 90s to regularly or consistently below 80s and even into the 70s and 60s at night, we might start seeing some black spot on the roses. Well, what we want to do then is to make sure that we use a product to protect those leaves. This could be a synthetic chemical product like Daconil or thiophanate methyl, or you could use a natural type chemical such as potassium bicarbonate, or even a biological type product like that contains a bacterium like bacillus type formulation. Those products out there, and some of those homeowners can get to. Um, there are also brand names like the potassium bicarbonate would be, I think, C's. And there are some other product that have the bacillus ameliquafaciens that are biological agents against a lot of foliar diseases, including powder mildew on roses. Now, one thing to keep in mind here, biological agents often works best as preventive. They don't work very well when disease pressure is high. So it's a competition thing. So keep in mind here is some things work better as a preventative, other things work better as a curative. So realizing which one of those uh, um, is an asset to your arsenal, and also keep in mind that one of the things that you can do to be effective in managing those diseases is to get a good identification, a good guess as to what is happening. So through the years as you are in this business, you're going to learn a lot of stuff, whether it's at talks or something. But if you're not sure what it is, sometimes it is, it's good to make a guess, but it's also good to take a sample before you make treatment. Send it into the plant clinic to get a diagnosis, and that way you can have a confirmatory diagnosis and keep that in your mind. If you guess correctly, it will confirm it. If you didn't guess correctly, it will give you an answer that you can sort of equate that with what you see in the years ahead. So keep in mind that. Oh, another thing before I forget to mention, when we deal with chemicals too, the formulation of the chemicals is going to be important in how you use them. So timing, when to put it on, how to put it on, whether it's a drench spray, it depends on what your target is, and the type of formulation. Is it a powder? Is it emulsified concentrate? Things that you might need to do with it. And also, don't forget, the label is real important because you need to get the rates right. If you use too much, there is the potential of causing damage to the plant. If you use too little, then you're not going to get the efficacy that you might want. Now, let's talk a little bit about planning ahead. So, when we talk about fall disease prevention, um, really the planning ahead should be done probably in the spring and some of the action items in the summer. It's really trying to get things ready for the fall. Now, keep in mind here is, you might start growing things in the spring and maintaining it through the summer when it's real hot in most part of Texas. The goal is, how do you use that time in the summer to minimize stress on the plant and still try and put things in place where you are encouraging the plant to grow vigorously. Realize this: a vigorous plant, a healthy plant, is less likely to be attacked by a pathogen. So keep that in mind. And also in a landscape, you have annuals and you have perennials. So with perennials, there are times that I would tell folks, take a look at those plants, whatever plants you have. If you do get disease on it year after year after year, try and identify that disease, because if it is one that is maybe overwintering on the plant, then at some point you might have to consider removing that plant and starting fresh, so you're not just continually propagating the pathogen in that spot and have that be a foci where you can have whether it's spores or the bacterium multiply and be an origin of point for new infections. So there's some risk assessment that's involved. So let's run some scenarios. You know, this is one thing that we can advise a lot of homeowners. We can give suggestions, but not all homeowners would do this. What we find is those that are hobbyists, those that enjoy gardening, they might take that to heart. They might actually do some of these practices, which really a lot of it is monitoring and looking at risk assessment and what things that they can do preventatively before the fall. Now, as a business, a landscape maintenance approach, things that you move in, if it's a contract that you have, if it's a property that you have been caring for, hopefully when you start managing that property, you would have gotten the layout of the land, get a good understanding of topography in terms of where the drainage is, where the problem areas are, and also get an inventory of the type of plant problems that might be there. Yes, you heard me right. Not only about the plants, but also an inventory of plant problems, so the historical information of things that have gone wrong in that landscape. When you take that into account, then you can look what other environmental factors that might trigger those historical type diseases that keep showing up. And then learning a little bit about those pathogens, you might be able to say, hey, let's look at it. What type of environmental triggers or conditions is actually going to increase the disease pressure? In other words, making it conducive for the growth of that pathogen itself. Keep in mind that when you have a large or higher number of the bacterial population or fungal population or viral population or insect population for that matter, then the likelihood of disease onset or problem onset also goes up. So that's the risk assessment right there. In terms of a business, this is one area where as a business you can offer a care plan, looking a year ahead and working with that homeowner to say, okay, based on the inventory that I've done on your property, not only with the plants, but the type of problems that has previously seen, you can also add things that are common in that area that could get on those plants that might be there. For example, if you have a landscape that have quite a bit of boxwoods, well, what type of problems do we have? Well, we have a bad one called Boxwood Blight. Thankfully, this is one that has not been detected or found in Texas yet. But more commonly, we run into a few other things, something like Boxwood Volatile Blight, which is another fungus causing some death of branches. We also have Phytophthora type root rot as well as Fusarium root rot, which can actually take out a branch or two, making the boxwood look a little bit ugly. And you also have Phytophthora root rot, which could literally take out the whole plant, where suddenly you have a boxwood plant that turns almost yellow or golden yellow, appears to be dried out. So you do have a bunch of the different things that could occur on that particular boxwood. And so in a care plan type situation, you might say, when are those things likely to happen? Now, keep in mind, too, that they are abiotic type situations where boxwood, if they're grown together, you got that fibrous roots that may be competing for water. Well, what happens then is they're going to, one is probably going to lose out. And so in a row of plants, you might have one or two plants that are dead. Well, that's not a pathogenic issue, but that's more of an environmental type, compatibility type issue. So how do you deal with that? Perhaps in some cases, making the homeowner or the customer know that it is a possibility and actually suggesting a plan. Something like that could be as easy as, well, if we do see that and it's not a disease problem, perhaps we need to thin out the number of boxwood plants. Now, if it might be a potential fungal type problems, realize that, okay, whether it's volatile blight or whether it's fusarium, we need to take a close look at it to see if we do find any signs on the base of the plant, on the branches of the plant. there's also a dieback on Boxwood Blight that's caused by Chlorine. Well, how do we see that? If we see some of those symptoms, now a lot of the symptoms is generic, and so it's really hard to tell one from the other. Um, and it would be a good idea to send it into the clinic and said, hey, I wonder what it is. If you see tufts that look like salmon color, well, that's Volatella. If you don't see anything, but you see some cankers, very likely it might be Chlorine. If you see the whole plant dead and you peel off the bark at the base of the plant and you see streaking on the vascular system, that could be as well Phytophthora. But send it in, get confirmation. That way you can associate what you see, in other words, your experience, with the results that confirmatory that results that come back from the clinic. And hopefully you only need to do it once, so that you can remember what it looks like, and it helps you to learn how to diagnose the problem for the future. And you can use that in terms of educating your clients, and as well as market your services in that area and how to help them manage a nice looking landscape. Again, realize what we're doing here is trying to educate the client that our goal is to have a pristine type garden, but realize in biology there are always exceptions, and what we want to do is we realize that there are times that it might not look pretty, but we want to minimize that as much as possible. We want to minimize the incidence, and we want to minimize the occurrences. Well, hopefully, I've gone through some stuff. I know we did a lot of chatting, and I'm sorry I'm not there. But if you do have any questions, put it in the chat box, or send it with Dr. Gu or Paul, and we'll try and answer some of that, whether it on the Plant Clinic Facebook page, where this I guess you could say webinar or Chat with Green Aggie session will be posted. Questions can be put out there too, and we'll try and answer some of those things. So just a quick recap as to what to do, in terms of disease prevention in the fall. Realize two things. You can talk about educating your clients, or things that you can do on your own as a landscape maintenance operator. Both, there are very similar elements there. Look for things that you can do in a non-invasive way, cultural practices, minor changes to create an environment that is not conducive for the pathogen. If you're looking at treatments, realize what's out there, but most of all, know what you're dealing with in terms of the pathogen that you may be dealing with. Because once you have a good identity of the pathogen, then you can select for treatments that would be effective against it. And planning ahead, things that you can educate a homeowner as to what they can do on their own time, because they will be on their land, and hopefully they're out there every day or every other day or something. And you as a business person probably wouldn't be able to get to that property once every 2 weeks or so. But one of the best things that you can provide too is that expertise, that service, if you decide to go full service, sort of a preventative care plan type approach in terms of managing a landscape, to look a certain way, and to basically have a plan that you work out with the client to know how to act, what to do when there are problems that arises. And keep in mind too, we at the Texas Plant Disease Diagnostic Lab here, we provide confirmatory diagnosis. It's not a one-day turnaround with an answer. It takes some time, because what we do is we try to isolate, to recover the pathogen, or to detect the pathogen. So if we actually send a report that said this is what it is, I want you guys to know that somewhere we have a record that we have detected it, observed it, took a picture of it, or isolated it, or cultured it. So there's proof that particular organism is or was present. So hopefully that will help you guys. Again, thanks for listening in.
Okay, I can't even see my stop share button. So this is how much bandwidth that Dr. Ong has taken. Can you all see that he is in the can you all see that he's in the waiting room? And
let him in.
Oh,
He's
oh,
in
you
now. He's
all right,
chit-chatting
great.
with me.
Yeah,
all right.
he's chatting.
all
And we
right,
did
good.
have a question, Dr. Ong, about diseased leaves in the compost. Yeah, when is it okay to put some diseased leaves in? Which ones should you not put in there? How should
All
you
right,
handle that?
Well, howdy, folks. Just managed to get in from another meeting, and I got to jump out again. Be done by 1:30 to another meeting. That's a great question that has been asked a lot. Is what is appropriately can be disposed or that can be put into a compost pile to be recycled. The main thing is most disease pathogens, fungal that is, or even bacterial, will be fine to be tossed into a compost pile, because if it's done correctly, that heat, that turning should reduce the population. And let me say that very clearly, should reduce the population of the pathogen, not eliminate or eradicate the whole population. So it's a risk management game. If you reduce or suppress the population of the pathogen, the likelihood of it becoming a problem coming out with the compost is very minimal. Now, it also goes to depending on the identity of the pathogen that you may be dealing with. If you deal with pathogens that, let's say, produce spores or bacterial, for example, they don't survive very well outside of the host, or they get desiccated quickly. Well, those things are more likely that you're going to reduce or suppress the population much, much better than, let's say, something like southern blight, Sclerotium rothschii, that if they produce the sclerotia, now that sclerotia is pretty resistant to heat. So if you toss in something that already have 1,000 or so sclerotia or thousands of sclerotia in there, do understand that when you do reuse that compost or use that compost later on, there is a very good possibility that sclerotia could pop open, and you have an active fungus roaming around to look for a victim. So knowing the identity of the pathogen is important to know what you can or cannot do. But in general term, most plant disease material can be tossed in the compost because they do not survive well. And the composting process do suppress or reduce the population size of those pathogens.
Yeah, and I think right now a lot of what we're getting is like leaves that have tree leaves that have old leaf spots, and they're kind of not real dangerous pathogens, I guess is how I would say it. I mean, they're not very likely to reinfect your trees from compost.
Right. And
yeah.
and when you talk about foliar pathogens and all that, I think I mentioned some of it, not in the context of composting and so on, but every year when leaves drop from oak trees, they're most likely they're gonna have Tubacia and powder mildew on them. I take mine up and I actually try and crush it up smaller and keep it as actually a mulch.
Mhm.
Not even or brown material in my compost, but I also utilize it as a mulch. Part of it is I realized the powder mildew, okay, so if it does survive or overwinter in that mulch, it might cause or show up again, but it's not going to kill that tree. The fact too, if you compost it, the very likelihood of that powder mildew or Tubacia basically breaking down, it's high. So you're going to have a reduction of population as well. Thanks, Laura. Great questions.
Well, and then the follow-up was kind of like, can you treat your compost pile with a chemical to make it sterile? But you can't, because you need the organisms to break down your
Well,
organic
the correct answer is
you don't want a
you
sterile
can.
compost pile. Yeah.
Right. You can, as the compost owner, you could do anything you want, but realize the impact of the actions. If you use a fumigant to take out everything, then realize now you don't even have an organism to help you with the breakdown. And so you're going to end up with a thing that's not broken down for much, much longer, and you're relying on other things coming back in to cause that breakdown. Now, if you're really concerned in terms of production wise, trying to keep clean, what I've seen some folks do is once they're done with the compost pile, they have it on their property. In that pile, usually they'll try and use a non-permeable surface where they would put the compost, ready to use compost to go. And in some cases, it's a bin type situation where they would run a steam generator in there. And this is after the composting process is done. And so that steam is really a steam sterilization, taking it up to heat, essentially pasteurizing the whole darn thing and let it cool down before use. So that's an approach basically to give yourself at least a reduced risk to potential pathogens by taking an approach of steam sterilization of the media.
Sure. And then I have a question for you, Dr. Ong. I noticed that there weren't a whole lot of viruses or virus samples sent in from woody ornamentals. So does that mean you did not receive a bunch of rose rosette disease samples this year?
Yes, that is correct. Now, one of the things that it's been interesting in the clinic, so the folks at the clinic, they don't particularly like to see things that are common. You have to remember,
boring,
people
right?
at the clinic are plant pathologists. You know, we want those things that are difficult to figure out, unique, perhaps never seen before, or head scratchers. The thing is, once people recognize symptoms, they're less likely to send it in. So I think that two things happening here. Rose rosette, it's been out there for a bunch of years. We got some really high disease pressure area and been enough news and education out there that people recognize symptoms. And for the most part, they are pretty accurate in their visual diagnosis based on those symptoms, at least on some of the roses. There's still, do bear in mind, there's still some odd symptoms there that could still point to a rose rosette. But by and large, with your shrub roses, knockout series, drift series, the symptoms that most folks are familiar with are typically what would show up, and that's what they would recognize. We don't expect those to be sent into the clinic. Secondly, it does seem like that cold, the freeze or snowmageddon, whatever you want to call it, in February, I thought it would kill off a bunch of roses. It didn't. In fact, it made it look better, much, much better. Now, don't get me wrong. There are places that had rose rosette occurring, but I've been surprised that it is not much more severe than it has been this year. So did the cold affect the infection? I don't know. My expectation was that the cold would kill the roses that I infected. I don't think it entirely did. So why is it low? Did the cold basically did away with a whole bunch of mite population? Don't know that either, because with the samples that come in, we don't see a huge population of the mites, so recover huge numbers of mites either. So could it play a role? It could, but we don't know. Great. Any other questions, guys? And again, like I said, if you do, you can put that in the Facebook post when Dr. Gu posts it out there, or you can throw it in the chat. I'm going to have to jump off again in about 4 or 5 minutes to another meeting. But yeah, as I want to recap on the little recording that I did, the idea here is to look ahead, to plan ahead. A lot of times with preventative action is knowing the history will put you on a good footing in terms of how to proceed ahead. And always remember, a confirmatory diagnosis to know what you're dealing with is going to be key into having a successful program.
All right.
All
Thank you,
right,
Dr.
back to
Ong.
Dr. Gu or whoever's running
Yeah, it
this
seems
thing.
like there's no questions. I'm gonna post the recording on the Plant Clinic the YouTube channel, so you all see it there. If you want to review some of the contents, what Paul and Kevin just presented. Well, thank you all. Have a great afternoon.